We have major breaking news. It turns out that the ATF is being deployed to shut down street crimes on the streets of Washington, D.C. And frankly, I could not be happier. Because if the ATF agents are actually helping to fight street crime in D.C., that's a great thing when it comes to our Second Amendment rights. From my point of view, let's break all this down when we come back. And some crazy things about D.C. crime statistics that I did not know about, and you're going to be shocked when you hear them right now. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Box of Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and I'm proud to say the top voice of the Second Amendment in America. Thank you, 2025 Gundies Awards. All right, so we have some very good news, and great news for the Second Amendment comes in different forms, different shapes, and different ways. And today, I think this is fantastic news for our right to keep and bear arms, because it turns out that as part of President Trump's decision to fix the nation's capital, which he is well within his constitutional authority to do so, the District of Columbia is created effectively by the United States Constitution to be a neutral location for the capital, not located in any one particular state. That was how this was designed by the Founding Fathers, the writers of the Constitution. The District of Columbia is a federal area controlled by the federal government at the end of the day, not by any one particular state. And it's pretty clear that the capital is mostly a cesspool. In addition to the fact it's built on a swamp and is full of swamp creatures known as the deep state. But in particular, there's a lot of homelessness, crime, and just dirt. It's just the way it is and the way it has been. There's no need for this. And President Trump has taken it upon himself to clean this up. But that's not what the point of this video is. Although I'm going to give you a couple of interesting crime statistics at the very end that I did not know that you're going to find interesting. The purpose of this video is why this effort by President Trump to clean up the nation's capital, which millions and millions of people come from around the world to see America for the first time, and they visit Washington, D.C. We don't want them to make our country look like a cesspool. That's terrible. That's not good for America. We don't want that kind of impression out there, as far as I'm concerned. But the reason why this is great for the Second Amendment is because of the breaking news reported by the Associated Press and confirmed by, for example, the Reload, Stephen Gutowski over there at the Reload. If you're not following the Reload and Stephen Gutowski, then you should be doing so. He does a great job covering Second Amendment and gun-related news. And they're both Stephen Gutowski, the Reload, and also the Associated Press are reporting that agents of the ATF have been deployed on the streets of Washington, D.C. And I could not be happier for several reasons. One is I think it's a good idea to clean up D.C. for the reasons we mentioned. It is full of crime, and we should clean it up. This is, among other things, the nation's capital. But beyond that, there's something called opportunity costs, which means that if you're going to school today, you can't go to work today. If you stay home today, you're not out doing something else. There's an opportunity cost. If you decide to go to the movies tonight, one of the opportunity costs is the things that you're not able to do while you're at the movie. So if you go to the movies tonight with Bob, you're not going to be able to stay home and watch TV with Mary, let's say. That's an opportunity cost. And this is particularly important when it comes to our Second Amendment rights and the ATF. Because as I've explained on this channel before, as long as the ATF agents are doing something productive on the streets of D.C., walking up and down K Street and Connecticut Avenue, whatever it is, making sure people are behaving, what are they not doing? What is the potential opportunity cost to have an ATF agents walk up and down the streets of Washington, D.C.? Well, as I see it, it's not an opportunity cost in that context. What it really is making sure that the ATF agents are doing something productive, cleaning up Washington, D.C., as opposed to doing something very unproductive, maybe even dangerous to our right to keep and bear arms. Because as I've explained before, if you look at the history of things like the Waco debacle or the Ruby Ridge debacle, the recent Arkansas airport mess, and many other examples I'm sure you all can come up with. If you look at these, in my opinion, the sense I've always had is that the ATF tries to show that they are as good as smart as accomplished as their big brother, the FBI. And as a consequence, from my point of view, if ATF agents are sitting around looking for something to do to quote unquote prove their worth, let's say, I think that generally is bad for our right to keep and bear arms. Because when they're looking for something to do, as opposed to being told, just walk up and down the streets and keep DC safe, you don't know what they're going to come up with. There's an old saying, of course, that idleness is the devil's workshop. There's different ways to phrase that, but basically the notion is idleness is the devil's workshop, meaning that if you have idle hands, if you're not working or being productive in some way, you're sitting around reflecting, there's a good chance you're going to come up with something that's going to be counterproductive, deleterious. And I think that applies to the ATF here. Keep every ATF agent, in my point of view, from my point of view, I'd want to keep every ATF agent bogged down monitoring street crime in DC. Because if they're doing that, they're not looking for opportunities out there in the heartland to mess with their Second Amendment rights, to harass gun dealers, mess around with gun companies, and so on and so on. Kicking in the door of some, old dude that's a collector on weekends at gun stores, and now they argue he's engaged in the business or some other nonsense like that. As far as I'm concerned, none of that advances public safety. This is doing nothing but advancing the notion of malum prohibitum, which means, sort of no moral component to a crime, right? As we talked about before, malum prohibitum crimes are those where there's no connection to justice or morality. These are just crimes that are made up by politicians with no connections to any sense of right or wrong, in contrast to malum in se crimes like rape, robbery, murder, burglary, lying, fraud, things like this, that in your heart of heart is just wrong, even if you don't know what the legal code says. But in contrast, malum prohibitum crimes are basically every single federal gun control law. Because all the other state crimes of murder, rape, and the like are already outlawed. So federal gun control law is really about malum prohibitum crimes, victimless crimes like, hey, your barrel's too short. It's a half an inch too short. Or you've got the wrong kind of trigger. Gun shoots too fast, or whatever it is. So the fact that they're reporting is that the ATF is now walking up and down the streets of DC, that's fantastic. In fact, here's a quote from the Reload, just because I think it's good that you know about the Reload and the work they do in the gun space. Here's what they had to say about it. A significant contingent of Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosive agents is currently patrolling the streets of the nation's capital. Around 30 ATF special agents are part of the coalition of federal law enforcement agencies that descended on city neighborhoods as part of President Donald Trump's takeover of Washington, D.C. policing, an agency spokesperson told the Reload on Wednesday. However, the agency could not say exactly what its mission is or what, if any, deployment restrictions agents are operating under. Instead, it referred questions to the White House. I think that's great stuff. So what did the White House have to say to the Reload? Here's what they said. White House spokesperson Abigail Jackson confirmed the ATF's role in the federal operation. Quote, as part of President Trump's bold action to address violent crime and make D.C. safe again, there has been an increased presence of federal law enforcement agents in Washington, D.C. The ATF, along with 19 other agencies, is playing a role in these efforts. Thank you, Lord. Because the more the ATF agents are in Washington, D.C., walking up down those streets, they're not in your neighborhoods. They're not harassing your FFLs. They're not harassing your gun dealers. They're not messing around with your gun shows. So I think this is great news. Now, at the start of this video, I also promised, in addition to the great news, that ATF agents are not in your neighborhood because they're in D.C., so they can't mess up your Second Amendment rights because they're in Washington, D.C., stopping actual street criminals, which is what they should be doing, instead of messing around with actual law-abiding Americans just trying to exercise their Second Amendment rights. And some of these statistics I'm going to give you that are kind of interesting. I may be making these observations on Fox News over the weekend. I'm supposed to be on I think Saturday afternoon. I'll put a community post there to let you know if I have a confirmed time. I was supposed to be on last weekend, but of course I was at that great Gun Owners of America event. The Goals Conference in Knoxville was a tremendous success, but I could not do Fox News out there. I just had too much going on. So I'm right now I'm supposed to be on Saturday afternoon, but again, I'll confirm that in a community post. But anyway, a couple things to keep in mind. You all have heard that the sort of the anti-Trumpers out there are arguing that DC's crime rate has supposedly been falling. But you probably have also heard, if you haven't, you're hearing it here now, that there was a police commander was put on leave for allegedly falsifying crime data in DC. That's right, a police commander in DC was basically fudging the data to make crimes look lower and crime statistics look better for DC than they really are. I'm not shocked by this because I've talked to various law enforcement agencies around the country, and it's not a shock that the police forces like crime to be low statistically because it makes them look better and they're less apt to get, for example, the police chief fired. So I've seen this over and over and over again, the way this game gets played. The other thing is, and this is really what I was shocked by, it turns out that is generally the case, that any crimes committed by minors under the age of 18 in DC are generally not counted as crimes in DC. That's right. You're not going to believe this, but one of the interesting things is that these crime data does not account for the fact that under DC law, crimes committed by minors are considered what are known as delinquent acts, and not crimes for the purposes of reporting statistics. So, for example, if you're under the age of 15, basically nothing you do will ever be considered a crime for the purposes of statistics. It will only be considered a delinquent act. And once you're over 15, but before you're 18, if you commit a felony, it's possible you can be charged as an adult, but if you're not, again, it will be just viewed as a delinquent act. And as again, if it's a delinquent act, it's technically not a crime. Now, the reason why this is important is the Department of Justice has explained repeatedly that the average age, not the minimum age or the earliest age, but the average age that minors, or I should say that average age that people join gangs in the United States is 15. So that means there's some people younger than 15 joining criminal gangs, and there's some people older than 15 joining criminal gangs for the first time. So here in DC, if you're under the age of 15 or under, and you commit a violent crime, for example, it's a delinquent act. It's not a crime, thus suppressing the actual crime statistics in DC. And moreover, it's well understood in sort of the gang community that the older gang members will often recruit younger gang members who are under 15 to do a lot of the dirty work, because everyone understands on the street this exact dynamic, that if you're using younger people under 15, they're not going to be charged and sent away to Leavenworth, for example, for 50 years for doing a terrible crime, let's say. But if you use somebody younger, you don't have that risk. So there is a reason why these gangs have older members and younger members. There is some strategy associated with that gang activity. I don't support it, of course, but again, that is often the reality on the ground, using younger gang members to go out and do bad things because they're less likely to suffer terrible consequences because of their age and the way the system works, as I've just described here. So when you're seeing this discussion about whether or not DC is a dangerous or not place, we know it's a dangerous place because I would challenge any liberal that thinks it's a good place to live in DC, to walk the streets of certain parts of Washington, DC between the hours of, let's say, I don't know, midnight and 3 in the morning, and let's see how that works out for them. But I don't think they're going to be taking up any of those challenges anytime soon, do you? Nevertheless, you can have a debate about the National Guard and what Donald Trump is doing, but overall, cleaning up DC, as far as I'm concerned, is great. And from the purposes of the Second Amendment, keeping the ATF and other agencies that might potentially be infringing upon our right to keep arms, locked down, if you will, monitoring street crime in DC, I think has the ripple effect, a derivative and secondary effect of protecting our Second Amendment rights. Because if they're in DC fighting street criminals, they're not harassing law-abiding Second Amendment supporters across this great country. So anyway, there you have it. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure you follow me on X at @4boxesdiner. Don't forget to subscribe both to YouTube and to Rumble. And I look forward to talking to you again real soon here at the 4 Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.